Hi everyone, my name is Shaisa Sarfat and I'm the HR and Talent Lead here at Eve Anderson Recruitment. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us for this webinar. Today I'll be presenting to you the topic of interviewing and hiring remotely in the Caribbean. And I also have a special guest with me, Melanie Gregory, who's our HSC advisor, who will be chatting briefly a bit about the HSC considerations at the topic at hand. And just to let you know that we have just some quick general housekeeping guidelines. You would have noticed that once you joined into the call, your microphones would have been muted. And this is really to help us minimize any distractions during the course of the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat section where you can input your questions and I will get or attend to those after the presentation has taken place. So let's get started. And before I do, I have a quick video that I would like to share with all of you speaking about Eve Anderson Recruitment and this year marking our 50th year or 50th anniversary. We're having a bit of technical difficulty. I can always get back to that video for you guys. So let's get into it. As I said, we're in our 50th year at existence here at Eve Anderson Recruitment. And throughout it all, we've been able to grow and achieve and adapt to the necessary changes. And how do we go about doing this? We've been in existence since 1970, and we've really been able to stick to our core values and our core beliefs in doing so. And this has allowed us to serve across the Caribbean, not just Trinidad and Tobago, but our clients regionally as well as internationally. We've been serving since 1970, again, sticking to our core values and really being able to adapt to the changes ever present in the environment here today. So let's get started. Are you ready? And I really want to ask the question here, are you ready to adapt to the new normal? Are you ready to challenge yourselves in the way that you are operating in your new business here today? The challenges that has been brought across to us due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and to really be able to act or adapt successfully in the market, some of the things that you may want to take a look at a strategic level is being able to invest in technology, as well as taking a look at the cultural elements and being able to understand how we can change now the mindset of everyone, the mindset of your staff, the mindset of your employees, and how to go about doing so. And what are some of the tools that you would need to be able to conduct and adapt to this new normal? Is it that you need new training requirements in place? Is it that you need policies to be in place? What are the steps that you really need to take here and to be able to evolve in this economy due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how you can bring these tools across so that you can prosper and ensure business continuity happens? So what I would say, and some of the terminologies that you would hear going forward, is adapting to the new normal. And what is this new normal, and what does adapting to the new normal really means? Now, the new normal is really being created each and every day as we speak. So it's about us being able to strategically look at the goals and realign the goals that you may have set for your business pre-COVID, and how does that alignment now have to change post-COVID, and really being able to connect and see what's happening out there, and how can you engage and adapt to this new normal, as we would keep hearing. So for the process of this, or for the purpose of this specific webinar, I've had here the topic as to why we're considering in the hiring process the way of going virtually, and how can we adapt to this virtual method or working remotely as well. So some of the things that you may need to consider or why you would want to consider virtual interviews. We know businesses right now may be a difficult time in the sense that some businesses may still be doing hiring, and some businesses may hold back in this process, but still need to understand how to go about doing this when times have picked up and those times are looking good for each one of your businesses. So employers who may be actively seeking to hire candidates may now opt for virtual interviews and virtual interaction for the job interview process instead of using those in-person interactions, causing a shift in the hiring process. So some of the things or some of the reasons why you would want to consider virtual interviews is that, first of all, it allows us to practice or to have the benefit of social distancing. And what is social distancing? This is another term that you would hear during this course of the pandemic season as well, social distancing. So virtual interviewing or virtual interviews allow you the benefit to still interact with each other, but in a virtual manner. So you can still keep that safe distance and still be able to conduct your interview in a good setting or in a successful setting. Scheduling. Now, virtual interviews also allows you the part of where you can accommodate different schedules, and it allows you the flexibility of being able to schedule at different times. And what does this mean? It simply means that now you can set interviews, whether it be first thing or early in the morning before someone goes to work, during a lunchtime sitting, or even after work hours. So it allows you that flexibility in being able to schedule or look at things where you may not have been able to do before. So sometimes it might be that the candidate may now, instead of having to, take a day off or take a half day, maybe they could now sit and look at these settings and take the time to do so before going to work or at their lunchtime. So really being able to take advantage of the flexibility option and how investing in your technology could help you to adapt and adopt this type of process. Virtual interviews also allows you to speak with candidates, whether it be regionally. So for example, if you have a business not just located in Trinidad and Tobago, but also located regionally throughout the Caribbean islands, this platform really allows you to benefit or allows you the benefit of being able to have a wider pool of candidates that you could now select and choose from for different locations, or even if you're seeking for a wider pool of candidates who can take place here, that can take place here in Trinidad and Tobago. So it really allows you the benefit of having a wider pool or a wider talent pool to choose from. In this virtual setting or this virtual interactive manner, it can also allow candidates to feel a bit more comfortable in this setting. And this is something I've observed as well, conducting virtual interviews myself. Sometimes in this setting, and as you know, with an interview, candidates can feel a bit stressed, they're a bit nervous, and they may not be able to best represent themselves sometimes, even though they may be a well-qualified candidate for the role. So in this virtual interaction, it allows for a bit more or less stressful, for the candidates, and it allows for a bit more natural or comfortable responses from the candidate. So these are some of the reasons why you may want to consider virtual interactions or virtual hirings. Now that you've considered why you may need to do virtual interviews and how you should be able to shift into that type of dynamic using technology, we now need to understand how you can prepare to conduct the virtual interview. So what type of preparation tools or preparation tips that you would need to implement going forward for now and in the future? And I'll give you an example here at Evanderson Recruitment. So picture this back to late March, where the government would have advised us all that non-essential businesses would have had to now close their doors during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we at the Evanderson Recruitment, we are in the business, so our core business is, of course, recruitment. So we really had to take a step back here and take a look at our processes that we have in place to understand how we can now change and evolve the way we do things here. So instead of now having to do our virtual interview, or sorry, our interviews in person, which is something that, you know, we would have been doing since time goes by, we've now had to evolve our process into doing this virtually and using technology to our best advantage to do so. And some of the tips that I have for you prepared here are, first and foremost, being able to determine where in the hiring process can you do these virtual interviews. Is it that you can conduct these virtual interviews, or you would like to conduct these virtual interviews in the pre-screening where you have a larger pool of persons you're looking at? Is it that you wish to do it for the first or even the final interview forum? So it's really taking a step back to understand what will work best for you during this time. So determining where in your hiring process you need to fit the virtual interview forum. Secondly, I would say choosing your preferred platform. So what works best for you, and understanding how you can make this as seamless as possible. So taking the time to choose your preferred platform, and we all know there's a lot of platforms out there that can be free as well. So for example, here today, we're using Microsoft Teams. There's also Zoom. You may choose to use Skype. So whatever works best for you and your organization, this is where you really need to take the time to invest in the technology to do so. And once you've decided a specific platform that you would like to use, you're making sure that you also take the time to test your connections. So it's also about testing to make sure that when things are happening on the day, things can run as smoothly as possible during that transition time. Thirdly, scheduling. And at this time, as with any interview, you also need to take a look at your scheduling process, and things may change a bit. So just some key notes here when you're scheduling your interviews. Apart from things like the dates and time, if you have something like a logon code that you need your candidate to input in order to connect to the system, this is where you input that type of information. So it's really being able to provide all the necessary details for this new type of virtual interaction or virtual interviews. Next, backup plans. And I can't stress how important a backup plan or having a backup plan in place can be. So now that, and I would have mentioned earlier, now that you've chosen the right platform and now that you've tested and you did all your connections, what happens on the day itself? Let's say, for example, you schedule your interview, you're ready and you're willing to go. And what happens in Trinidad? Rain falls. And we all know when rain falls, internet connections sometimes drop, or you can receive poor quality in your internet. So it happens after you do your testing. So putting a backup plan in place can really help, you know, help you to still be able to have a seamless interview. So keeping your candidate's contact information can really help to say that, you know, if something goes wrong, you can still contact the candidate, if it's via email, if it's via telephone, to still conduct the interview process at that stage. Or you can also rearrange or reschedule your interview if need be. Identifying. So taking the time to identify what you expect from the candidates and designing your questions based on that. So what type of technical questions would you like to ask? What type of behavioral competency questions you would like to ask? So these are the type of things that you need to take the time to consider when you're pooling or creating your questions for the interview itself, especially in this virtual interactive forum. Combined with that, you also need to develop, or what I would recommend you develop, is a standard rating system. So you're using your standard rating system to really keep track of how the candidates are performing during the course of the interview. And what I would say, I know time sometimes gets the better of us, and if we have 5 interviews scheduled for the day sometimes, I know things could go by pretty quickly and you may not be able to make your notes on time. But what I would say when you're doing this, and especially because it's new to us, take the time after each interview to write your necessary notes so that you don't forget what type of situations or responses the first candidate would have had. So taking the time to do so and make the necessary notes. My last tip is choosing a distraction-free location. So it's all about choosing a location with minimal distractions as possible. So we know if you're in an office setting, you probably have a designated room, which is good, and you can conduct your interviews there. But in this day and age, and we know the pandemic has really brought about some changes to us here, choosing a distraction-free location if you're conducting your virtual interviews remotely, let's say at home, it's about taking that time to consider, if you're doing it remotely from home, and let's say, the dog start barking, while you're trying to conduct the interview. So choosing the right location, even in your home setting, to make sure that there's minimal distractions as possible. Now that you have some preparation tips on how you could conduct your virtual interviews, and this is what really worked well for us here at Evanderson during the COVID times, the next steps here are actually conducting the virtual interview. And what are the steps, or what are some of the things that you need to take into consideration for conducting the virtual interview? First of all, dress professionally. So we know in an office setting, of course, we're all, dressed and ready for work. So we know you'll be fine and dressed professionally in that forum. But let's say again, you're doing a interview remotely from home. You started early in the morning, and for some reason that day, things can happen. You're hustling, and then you look down, and what do you have on? Pajamas. So it's really about taking the mindful note here, especially if you're doing the interviews in a remote setting, to understand that you still dress professionally and try to conduct the interview as you would as in an in-person interview. In this forum as well, what I would say that you need to pay attention to, and what we've been doing here and practicing here as well, is paying attention to things like facial expressions, voice tones, and trying to really keep engaged with the candidate. Making sure that you're able to keep eye contact is something that really, puts the candidate at ease as well. So making sure that you take the time to keep engaged, look at your voice tones, observe facial expressions, and these are the things, or these are the tools that you really need to be, train the mind to now be more aware of in this type of virtual interactive forum. Turn off, of course, any devices that you may have, again, to minimize any distractions, and as well as giving the interviewee enough time to respond and answer to the questions that are being asked. So if you have open-ended questions, you're making sure here that you really give the candidate enough time to answer in this virtual forum. And whilst I said that, also remember I would have stated in one of my earlier points that in this setting, candidates can feel a bit more natural, and even you yourself included. And sometimes we can get carried away and the time and talking and having our discussions. So also for you to be able, as the interviewer, to be mindful of the time and keep track of your timing as well. You're using this forum whilst you're conducting the interview here to discuss about your company's culture and values and provide clear information on what is expected for the candidates going forward as well. Providing a timeline. So because this type of setting, as I said before, is a new setting, it's a new way of us having to adapt to changes and evolve in this time and in this pandemic time, being able to provide a timeline as to when the candidates could expect feedback would be a helpful tool, and as well as following through as to when you would have indicated whether it's in a week's time, if it's in 2 weeks' time. So making sure that you really follow through with the candidates here once you're conducting the virtual interview. Perfect. What's the next step here? So now that you've taken the time to consider why you're using virtual interviews, you've taken the time to understand the strategic direction you now want to head into. Now the next step we have is how do we go about hiring and onboarding remotely? So that's my next topic here. And whether it be that you are hiring a new employee to work remotely, or whether it be that you are taking a step back and looking at your current organizational structure and looking to see how you can make your current employees also work remotely, are aspects that you really need to take a step back and think here. What are the right tools that you would need in this type of forum to be successful and allow for business continuity? So it's taking the step here if you're considering hiring remotely or your existing structure to implement remote working here. What are the right tools? So whether it be that you are introducing a remote work policy, and a remote work policy is something that I think would be outlining very clear and detailed instructions as to what is expected from the managers, from your line employees, and from all staff. So having a remote work policy, which includes all that information, and not just that, but including things like data protection and confidentiality agreements. So you really want to incorporate there, because if someone's working from a home setting, we must be able, or we must ensure that they're able to separate working from personal devices and using work devices. So it's being able to separate, differentiate that, and pull that in there into your remote work policy. So it's taking the time to provide clear details here. So you're really, stressing here how important it is and what are the expectations using your remote work policy. You may also need to take a look at your employee handbook as well and edit some things accordingly, whether it be things like overtime you need to include, and things like providing any work equipment for employees working from home. So making sure you set up the right tools here. You're taking the time to also set the right KPIs meaning key performance indicators, so that you align yourself or you align your employees as to what is expected and how are we going to measure the expectations. So it's really being able to put these two together. And what I would say for remote work setting, and we've also introduced this here at Evanderson Recruitment, where we were able to operate remotely during the lockdown for non-essential businesses. And we've now transferred that into us working here remotely for scheduled days in the office. So we're coming into office still, and we're also working remotely at different days during the week. So it's up to you and your business to see as well what works best for you, what can work best for your team, and how do you go about, and what are the tools necessary to implement these type of changes that you would like to introduce to your company in this setting as well. And what I would say is that it really allows for accountability and responsibility. So it's all about, as I mentioned before, being able to change the mindsets of each and every one of us. And it's going to take time, but it's taking the time to train, to reset the brain, reset the culture of what is now expected of employees going forward in order for us to all be successful during this time. And just to give you a quick briefing as to what a remote worker is, a remote employee is, or virtual employee, is usually someone that the company would hire to provide a service for the company, but operate in a remote location or not in the office location. So you're doing the work, except it's not in the office location, it's at a remote location instead. So with the recent pandemic, many businesses would have now been forced to look into this process. So whilst I would say that it would have been something in the back burner of our minds in the business to take a look at remote working, the COVID-19 pandemic has really forced us or driven us into implementing or trying to implement this type of measure. So it's taking a look at that and really being able to understand how our businesses can now evolve going in the future, and perhaps even have roles evolving. So looking at things like virtual assistants, or even how some of our, for example, I'm just using examples, how our marketing and communications personnel could now work. So while we understand as well that it's not for everyone or every type of business, but so for example, I would say if you're in oil and gas and you're offshore, I understand that a remote work setting may not necessarily be the right thing for you there. So even though you have also, it's for you to be able to take or to consider holistically, in your business, what it could work well for you there. What departments could it perhaps work well, and how can you test and how can you go about doing this to be successful? Now, Perfect. As I was saying before, what can you do to be successful when hiring remotely? Now, some of the traits that you may want to look for remote workers, whether it be that you are hiring a new remote worker, or if you're also looking within your current organization, what are the traits you want to look for? So I've highlighted some, which can be, for example, detailed-oriented persons that can keep abreast of their KPIs, being a self-starter, problem solver, minimal supervision required, being able to communicate well, as well as being able to have good time management skills. So whilst I understand that for current employees, some of these things may have to be trained a bit more because not everyone may be wired that way. If you're looking or seeking for new hires to work in this remote setting, these are some of the things that you may want to consider as behavioral competencies for the persons to have. Next, I want to talk to you a bit about the benefits of hiring remote workers. So now that you've gone through the process, you've considered, you've done the interviews, you've tested your connections and whatnot, you've decided to perhaps change the way you do things, whether it be with your current employees or for new hires, some of the benefits of hiring remote workers, first and foremost, I'll list out here for you, cost efficiency. So we all know at this time, especially, that businesses are really trying to look at their revenues and their expenses. And one of the ways to reduce this is looking also at the benefit of remote working. And for cost efficiency, you can now take a look and save at some operating costs. So you're saving in your operating costs, such as your desk space, your internet, your parking, or if your organization provides uniforms to your employees, you're also saving on that cost as well. So it's a good benefit here is that the ability to be cost efficient or cost effective during this time. Deliverables and having an open schedule. Because we're now in this remote work setting and we're looking at this remote work setting, it's about being able to keep an open and flexible schedule. So it's changing the dynamic again and changing the mindset. We know when we are in an office setting, you may be working for standard setting hours or standard business hours from 8 to 4:30. But for example, using this remote working situation, it really allows you to keep that open schedule where understanding where persons or what times of the day perhaps persons work best, whether it be in the morning time. I know I'm really productive early in the morning time. I'm really good at it. I get my stuff done. So it's being able to take into consideration those types of open scheduling and introducing specific KPIs to match and align to make sure that things are being done when the employee is also saying that their tasks are being done. My next point, workers may feel more productive. And I would have mentioned this before. So I know for myself, once I sign on home and I work remotely from home, I find myself, I sit behind my laptop and I get a lot done. Somehow or the other, I feel a bit more productive. And whilst I also like the setting of an office setting, and we all know that we're very social creatures, so we like to come into office, we like the little chit chat on the morning before you start off the day at breakfast time or at lunchtime. So sometimes when you're working remotely from home, it really allows you to kind of zone in and focus on the task that you're doing at hand. So sometimes you may be able to feel a bit more productive during this time. The next benefit I have for you, the stress of commute. Workers may also, in this setting, avoid the feeling of the stress of commute. So we know once you get up in the morning and you're ready to go to work, you sit in your car, or if you have to travel, and you're stuck in traffic for an hour or two. And the mindset when you reach your work is sometimes your brain feels very tired, and you have to now reset and retrain your brain before you start the day. Once you're in a remote work setting, you have, or you can avoid the stress of having to commute, or even if you're traveling, you can avoid having to cater for that extra expense of having to travel. So, which may also benefit not just your employee, but also the employer, because this may lead to less absenteeism because of the remote work situation. Now that I've taken a look at the benefits of hiring remotely, let's discuss some of the challenges of hiring remotely. And not just the challenges, but how can we make these challenges into solutions, and how can we turn them into the challenges into benefiting us and benefiting our businesses. So first of all, the first challenge I have first is being able to understand that remote work is not for everyone. So I would have mentioned before, it may not be for every type of job, and it's also not for everyone. So not everyone's wired that way to be able to automatically adjust into a remote work setting. So some candidates who may not have experienced it before may not have taken into consideration the feelings of isolation. So again, that's where the social interactions take place. We miss that social interaction in the office sometimes. And how can we get around this? And that's communication, which is another point I will discuss a bit further. But taking into consideration the feelings of isolation is an important feature here. It's also important to consider if you're doing a new hire, and it's for you to inquire or have questions posed to the candidate, asking them if they would have done a remote work situation in the past, and how successful was it for them in the past, and what have they learned that they can now bring forward into this new role here. Second point, micromanaging. So we may have some micromanaging to do here, especially at the initial stages. So if it's a new hire, of course, you still have that micromanaging aspect because that person is still getting adjusted to the organization. If it's a current employee, you will still have some micromanaging to do because it's something brand new to them, it's something being introduced, and it's about training the mindset here again. So if it's in the hiring process, you want to take a look at the traits I would have identified before, such as time management, communication skills, etc. Those are the things you may try to look out for here. And what could really match, and what I could say that works well, is that having a psychometric assessment done hand in hand together with your interviews could work to your benefit. So psychometric assessment is something that allows you to pull out the behavioral competencies of a person. And this is something that we offer here as well in Eve Anderson Recruitment. And what we've noticed works really well. So whilst you would have considered your questions and your technical questions, you also have the psychometric assessment here to use hand in hand together to understand both the technical nature and the behavioral competency nature as well. So it's being able to take into consideration how you go about micromanaging and how you also take that in consideration when you're hiring a new candidate and looking at the traits that you're looking for as well. My next point, communication, and I can't stress again, communication. It's important to ensure that communication here is key. And especially because this is something new to us, this is a new setting, you really want to be able here to set out what is required and be clear on what you expect about the communications and setting up the proper channels or the necessary channels to allow for communication to happen. So I'll give you an example here at Eve Anderson Recruitment. What we've been doing, apart from the investment in technology, we've been having our staff meetings virtually, whether it be once a week, just to be able to ensure that all our team members still feel involved, engaged. You avoid that feeling of isolation that I would have mentioned before. So it's being able to allow team members to still interact in that dynamic, as well as for each other to understand what's going on holistically in the business as well. So being able to communicate, whether it be that you set meetings, our department heads would have also been meeting with their staff and their line members, whether it be every day, every other day, and setting up the necessary tools to do so. My next point, tracking productivity. And this is a big one as well. So apart from communication, you also want to be able to, in a remote work setting, be able to track the productivity, because it's also still a mindset here, because I know we will be worried, especially if you're a manager here, you're thinking, okay, what if my employee or my staff or my team member is sitting back looking at Netflix at home instead of doing the work that you set out to do? So tracking your productivity is about being able to take the time, set the right tools, be clear on what is expected from the candidates, and knowing what employees are doing by setting the right KPIs. So whether it be that you now expect or you now arrange with your candidates or your new hire or your staff, that is, monthly or weekly reports or daily reports, even to understand where things are going, how things are heading with a specific project that you may be working on. So really being able to look at the metrics of your business so that you can track productivity and implementing the tools to do so. Last but not least, and this is a challenge here as well, employee trust. This is a huge one as well, and this works well paired together with communication and your productivity. Employee trust is something that, in order for a successful work from home arrangement or remote work arrangement to be had, it ultimately here comes down to trust, and trusting that what employees are saying that they are doing, that they are really doing and accomplishing at home. And how do we go about with trust? First is the communication I would have mentioned. So being able to openly communicate and also setting real expectations. It's being able to take a look and understand as a manager or as a supervisor or a team lead, taking that step back and saying, you know what, I understand that there are good days and I understand that there are bad days. I know for myself included here, I'll give you the example. Sometimes I look back, or if I go to work in the office or if I work remotely from home, I look back at the day and say, okay, you know what? I've actually accomplished more than I thought I was going to accomplish today. And I feel good about myself. And then there may be a day, sometimes it's usually a Friday, where I might take a look back and say, oh gosh, Shaista, I really didn't accomplish what I thought I was going to accomplish today. So there are good and bad days, and there's understanding that this is still going to happen. You're setting your expectations realistically here, understanding those things can happen, but also being able to ensure that staff are being able to take their accountability and responsibility and still being able to manage their KPIs and their targets, whilst understanding that those good and bad days do exist. So what's my next step? Now that you've considered remote working, the policies that you need to put in place to evolve into this way, you took a look at the benefits, you took a look at the challenges. The next step here that may be new for us is is onboarding remotely. And what is onboarding remotely? I'll chat with you briefly and just to give you an idea of what onboarding is. Onboarding really is where you take in the new hire comes in and you introduce that new hire to new colleagues, new peers, to the culture of the organization. So how do we go about doing this remotely? Just some quick tips I have for you. First of all, you still need to use this forum to establish your introductions and your networking. So you can still be able, just as we're doing here, set up a virtual meeting with the new hires, teammates, or other managers or supervisors if the schedule permits. Set up a meeting to introduce as seamless as possible in-person meetings, allowing for the new hire to connect and engage with their fellow teammates. If scheduling, everyone has busy schedules, and if that's a bit of a challenge, what you can perhaps do in this time is work on a welcome video. So that may be something new you may want to take a look at, where you create a welcome video if the schedules can't be arranged. Next, so during the onboarding process, you want to take the time to discuss your orientation schedule, what's expected from them for the first week, the first month, and the task list assigned during this period. So you're still taking those steps and perhaps having it in this virtual setting. You're using that time to define what your expectations are and acquaint the employees with their responsibilities and their roles. I remember when I had my first day at work, I would have been assigned a welcome buddy. So we all kind of have that idea of a welcome buddy and how helpful this welcome buddy can be. So in this type of forum or in this setting, you could take a look at how you could introduce a virtual welcome buddy. So you're still having that connection. The new hire could still have a direct point of contact that they could liaise with, or a friendly face that they could have in the organization as well. Take the time here to establish ongoing touch points, because again, it's something new. So you want to be able to establish your ongoing touch points and your check-ins here. So whether you do your check-ins at the end of the day, at the end of the week, take the time to do so in this virtual manner as well. So you're still setting up your meetings, you're still keeping that open communication, and you're having your check-ins as well. Because this is new, you also need to take a look and take the time to adjust and reevaluate to your business needs as time goes on and as time progresses. So taking that time to understand what works well and what doesn't, and adjust and reevaluate as needed. So the great news here is, now that you've considered all the processes, you've considered and done your virtual interviewing, you've considered hiring remotely, the great news here is that we at Anderson Recruitment can do all this for you. So our specialized team can take away that hassle, can take away that stress away from you having to do all this work, which allows you to focus more on your business. So we can help you with things like searching for your candidates or having pools. As I mentioned before, this is our 50th year. We've been around since 1970. We have a wide or extensive business and an extensive database with a skilled talent pool. So we have that existing already for you. And we also have our social platforms where we can advertise your specific job opportunities that you are looking for. We can also take the stress away from having to sift through the hundreds of CVs that may come in and conduct pre-screening interviews to really pull out the right candidates for you. So we can take that stress, as I said, take that hassle away, conduct your background checks or your work reference checks. I would have mentioned to you before things like the psychometric assessments and how well it works to pull out your behavioral competencies. We have our HSE services, things like medicals and drug tests, as well as payroll services. So I have with me, and I would have mentioned to you before, a special guest, and that's Melanie Gregory, who will chat with you briefly a bit about the HSE considerations on the topic at hand. Melanie?
Hi everyone. As Shaisa mentioned, I am Melanie, the HSE officer here at Anderson Recruitment, and I'm just going to touch briefly with you on our upcoming webinar, which will be an extension of this, remote working and employers' responsibilities. So as COVID-19 has changed the entire landscape of our work environment, we need to be able to adapt to those changes and adapt to the new normal, not just our employers, but also our employees. And we need to understand that it is going to be changing. And a great tool that can be used is remote working. So remote working not only protects ourselves, it reduces the number of persons in office to reduce the spread. You have vulnerable workers who can work remotely at home, who can be protected. So there's a lot of considerations to take in when you're thinking about either hiring a remote worker or allowing your staff to work remotely. So there's also a number of studies that show that working remotely actually increases productivity and that workers get through a lot more work and then they're able to enjoy their family time. But there are risks involved with remote working, and employers and employees need to understand those risks. So a lot more of this will be covered in our webinar coming up in July, but I'm just going to touch on a few points for you to consider now. So one of the main points, of course, is a risk assessment. Why do you need to do a risk assessment? You need to be able to understand the risks involved with any process that you do, and remote working is one of them. And it doesn't have to be an extensive risk assessment. It could just be a simple checklist. health and safety, it's not a stagnant thing. It's constantly changing, as with COVID-19. So our processes and policies must also be changing. We can have what's called living documents so that they change as the changes take place as well. And one of those is the remote work policy that Shaisa mentioned earlier. So that will also outline not just how your remote work is going to go, but also the health and safety considerations of working remotely and what you can put in place. So what you can put in place for your vulnerable workers, for your sick workers. So if somebody isn't feeling well, you don't want them to come into office, you can give them the option to work remotely at home or take their sick leave. So there are different options that you can do, and your policies should always be able to reflect what you're putting in place, and your staff should always be trained on those policies and the different options that they have available to them. One of the big things with remote working and with office work is ergonomics. So making sure that your staff is able to work comfortably and safely. So what that means is being able to work with a computer safely, how to properly set up your workstation at home. You may not have the proper tools in place, so there are different things that you could put in place as a company, such as being able to borrow equipment from the office, being able to borrow chairs or tables, and being able to train your staff on how to properly set up their workstations at home. One of the big things that Shaisam touched on was communication. Communication is key for remote worker. While there are so many studies that show that remote working can increase productivity, it also shows that people who are remote working for extensive periods can have trouble with their mental health, mainly because they are isolated and they're not getting the group activities that you get at work and that constant communication. So being able to set up a communication pipeline for that person will be great. So including a buddy system like Shaista mentioned, but you can actually do it remotely as well. So you know that you have check-in times every day to make sure that that worker is okay, or you can do video communication as well. And as an employer, you may want to be able to just check up on your worker and actually make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So video communication is a great way to do that. So these are just a couple of the points that we'll touch on a lot more in our webinar in July. And we at Evanison can help. If it's a little daunting, and health and safety can be very daunting for you as a company, or you may not be able to hire someone to do these things on a permanent basis, we at Evanison do offer those services, and they're all listed on our website. And if you need any more information, you can feel free to contact me. We offer a number of training services as well. We can do that remotely as well if that's something that you needed. And all the information is there on our website underneath employers. So if you need any more information, feel free to contact us, and look out for our upcoming webinar in July on remote workers. Back to you, Shai.
Thanks for that, Melanie. And just to give you guys an overview or wrap up here, the thing for us to really take a look at here is how do we go about evolving our business? What are the necessary tools that we need to have in order to have this be able to be a successful situation? What are the things we need to invest in? Sorry about that. Thanks for that, Melanie. Just to wrap up and give an overview here, currently we know that businesses are adopting new ways or trying to adopt new ways into doing things for their business in order to ensure business continuity. And the overview here really is taking a step back, looking at your strategic goals that you may have aligned yourself previously or before COVID, taking a look at the steps that you need to do after, during and after COVID, and seeing what are the necessary steps here that you need to ensure your business continuity and maintain business continuity. So is it that you now need to invest in technology to ensure that these things happen? Is it now that we need to also retrain, reset our minds, reset and recharge how our employees do the business now going forward in the future? What type of policies and procedures that you need to have in place going forward, or adjusting your policies and procedures going forward as well, and ensuring that the right training takes place so that your employees and your staff feel well equipped to handle the challenges going forward now and in the future. So taking that time, understanding your strategic direction, understanding how best you can use technology to your advantage, and knowing that there's a change in the mindset and in the culture of the way we do things for us to be able to adapt and evolve. So that's a short overview here. I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time out of your day and spending your time with us here. Are there any questions? Feel free to use the chat feature if you have any questions right now. If you don't have any questions during this point in time, feel free to contact us at 627-8233. And you can contact any one of our team members where you can ask for both myself, that's Shaista Sarapat, or Melanie Gregory if you have any health and safety questions as well. Feel free to also or to be aware that we have some upcoming webinars. So our next webinar will be on health and safety and how you adapt to the new normal, remote working. And Melanie will dive in a bit more in depth as to some of the HSE considerations for that type of topic. We also have a customer service training webinar coming up, and we also have a payroll services webinar coming up. So we are also taking the time adapting to technology here. We're having upcoming webinars, so feel free to take your time, look out for those upcoming events, contact us again if you have any questions. And if you do, and not at this time, what I will do, we will post up some FAQs on our website under our news section. So feel free to visit our website as well for any information or further information that you may have during this time. I'll just wait a few minutes to see if we have any questions coming in. If not, I will close off and thank you once again for your time. Okay, so we have a question here. What other methods can I use to assess the candidates if I cannot assess in person? Okay, so if you can't assess the person, and as we know, when you're hiring or having a new hire, you have to do your necessary background checks or your work reference checks. So what we have Eve Anderson Recruitment have done, we've used our virtual platforms and we have our connections at the necessary institutions where we can now reach out to ensure that we conduct the necessary background or reference checks needed. So it's about us being able to still look at certificates provided to us or look at the documentation provided to us, but also being able to confirm those documents, even though we no longer may have it physically in hand. We're also trained to identify what certificate should look like, what are the things that we need to look out for here. These are the things we're trained at, and we also take a look at our institutions and connect with our institutions to ensure that what persons say they input on their resume are true and valid information. Okay, so I have another question here. Someone is saying that I spoke or mentioned remote work policies and where you can get further information or assistance in developing policies like this. So remote work policy, as I mentioned before, is something that you really need to take a look at or ensure that you have in place when you're introducing this type of work arrangement. Now, you can feel free to contact us. As I mentioned, you can contact us. Our information is up on our website. The number is also 627-8233. My extension is extension 107, and we can further discuss how we can help you to map out or build out, because this is a service that we also offer where we can guide or even come up with your remote work policy. Okay, I have another question here. What are some of the ways that we conduct background checks, and is it limited to references? So we have both work reference checks, so that's where we contact previous employers to ensure that candidates would have performed well in their previous work locations. And we also have extensive background checks. So that's more or further in depth where we look at, and a report is provided here. So we take a look at things like criminal background checks in this, litigation checks, judgment checks, social media checks, home verification address. So there's also another extensive report or extensive type of background check that we also do. So feel free to connect with us, feel free to contact us, where we could also further discuss some of these background checks, especially at this virtual time. These are some of the things that you really want to take a look at and see how you could apply it into your new hiring process. Okay, that's all the questions for now. Thank you once again for taking the time to join us today on the topic of interviewing and hiring remotely. Feel free to visit our website, feel free to contact us, and look out for the upcoming webinars that we have coming in July. Thank you once again.